Hello, this is Addison from the Agency of Narrative Intrigue and Mystery, and welcome to this series of quick start videos for Eureka, Investigative Urban Fantasy. I'm not going to go over every single rule and modifier. There's no replacement for just reading the rulebook if you want to understand the rules, but these supplements will give you, the gist of everything and, how it's supposed to work. So that, if you're intimidated by the rulebook, reading the rulebook, you can at least, know the basics. And if you're intimidated by the rulebook, it's really not that bad. The vast majority of the page count is tables and character options and lists of stuff that's taking up a lot of space. You do not have to read 700 pages. It's more like 200 pages. So at the time of recording this, Eureka is in beta. That ultimate page count is also going to be lower when we've finished all the editing, but right now it's in beta. The editing is not finished, the art is not fully finished. You'll see some art, but it's mostly just this plain black, white, and red. And this version that I'm using for this recording is the July 11th version. It's the most recent version up to July 11th, which is when I'm recording this. We just released it on Patreon. If you want to get regular monthly releases, subscribe to our Patreon, which you should be able to find by Googling the Agency of Narrative Intrigue and Mystery Patreon. And it's also linked in the rulebook itself, and the rulebook you can get from itch.io or the Patreon. If you just Google Eureka Investigative Urban Fantasy, you'll find it. Anyway, this video is how to investigate in Eureka Investigative Urban Fantasy. So, investigation. This here is the core of the gameplay and what investigators are going to be doing the most during session time. They're called investigators, they investigate. It's called Eureka Investigative Urban Fantasy. It is about investigating. It's really a lack of good, robust investigation rules in a lot of other similar tabletop RPGs that drove us to start making Eureka in the first place. So it's very important to us, obviously, as well. And we spent 5 years on this project now. So before we get into the specifics of investigation, you need to know how to make a roll, the main dice roll mechanic of Eureka. 95% of rolls in Eureka are going to be made with 2 6-sided dice, also known as 2d6s. Rolls are made when the outcome of something in a scene is in question, according to the rules. You roll 2 6-sided die, add those numbers together, and add a relevant modifier to get the final result. A modifier is whatever number you're adding or subtracting from the dice based on a character's abilities or something else in the situation. There are different types of modifiers. There's base modifiers and contextual modifiers. Do not worry about those yet. You'll find what they are in the rulebook, but I'm not going to cover them in this video. I'm going to probably go over them in the video about composure, the composure mechanic. And also, I'm just going to pause real quick to make a quick aside here to mention something very important. The game master of Eureka does not decide the modifiers on the fly. They do not come up with the modifiers. The modifiers always come from the character sheet or otherwise some other explicit rule in the rulebook. If you or the game master feels that another modifier needs to be added that isn't already present from the character sheet or the rulebook because you think that the action is so easy that it needs an extra bonus modifier or so hard that it needs an extra penalty modifier, that's probably a sign that there just shouldn't be a dice roll in the first place. The character should just be able to do that action or should not be able to do that action with finality rather than requiring a dice roll to tell you something you already know, that either it's too easy or it's too hard, so therefore they can or can't do it. Another thing that is very important to understand is, like I mentioned in the approach video, how to approach Eureka, players and investigators are different. A player is sitting at the table, an investigator is in the world of the game, and they're not the same person. They're completely separate. We do refer to investigators making rolls and players making rolls. Those are the same thing. So are basically considered to be happening at the same time. The player will pick up and roll the dice whenever the investigator is quote-unquote rolling the dice by taking a risk on something or doing something that is in question and the outcome is not certain of. We also call it a skill check. It is a check to see if the investigator has the skill to accomplish the action, and the player will roll the dice to check. So consider those the same thing, even though the player and the investigator are not the same person. So now that you know how to roll the dice, literally, and add modifiers, we talk about what the numbers mean. There are 3 possible results of this standard type of 2d6 roll: failure, partial success, and full success. Failure is any result of 6 or below. A partial success is a result of 7, 8, or 9. And a full success is a result of 10 or above. What I'm showing you right now is a quick breakdown of the percentage chances of the different results with different modifiers, as you see here. So partial successes are fairly common, and full successes are kind of hard to get, but failures are not as easy to get as it might seem initially. Also, another thing, rolling double 1s is always a failure, regardless of the modifiers, and rolling double 6s is always a full success, regardless of modifiers. These aren't any more failure or more success than they otherwise would be. They aren't like, criticals that give extra success. They are just a success or failure automatically. If you know Apocalypse World, the game Apocalypse World, or any of its derivatives, probably pretty familiar with this breakdown of results, but you should still read this section of the rulebook in full, because Eureka is not a Powered by the Apocalypse game. It does things differently, and the way that Eureka uses the results is different. It is not the same as standard Powered by the Apocalypse. What exactly a failure, a partial success, or a full success means for the situation depends on the roll being made, and not just because it's a different situation. Failure obviously means they fail to do what they're trying to do. Full success obviously means they fully accomplish what they're trying to do. That does not mean that something just good automatically happens. If they're fully succeeding at doing something that's really stupid, then they just succeed at doing something really stupid and might screw themselves over. Like, if they make a skill check to punch a cop in the face and they get a full success, that does not mean that that scene will go well for them. That means they successfully hit the cop, and now they will have to deal with hitting the cop. A failure would have mean that they tried to punch the cop and missed. So I'm not going to go over this in absolute full detail in this video. A lot of partial success situations are given very specific results in the rulebook, just like they're given specific modifiers. But when it comes up to interpretation and it's not given specific results in the rulebook, a partial success will often either mean they succeed, but not as much as they could have, or they succeed as good as if it was a full success, but with some kind of drawback or sort of sideways consequence. This is a really nuanced thing, so you should read this section of the rulebook yourself, but I'm still going to go over the examples we use in this section of the rulebook, using some example scenarios with the athletics skill where that might be rolled. So if we assume that an investigator is running from someone or trying to escape something, and they're on a rooftop and they're going to jump across from one rooftop to another across an alleyway, that would really obviously be the athletic skill, which is a skill determining how strong and fast and athletic they are. So with that skill check, a full success would mean they leap across the gap and land safely on the opposite roof. A partial success would mean that they would probably still make the jump, because you can't really fall halfway off a roof, but they might fall a bit short and have to catch the ledge. As a consequence to catching the ledge, like a sideways consequence like I mentioned, the momentum of their jump might send them crashing into the wall, and that might cause them to take a little bit of damage from slamming against the wall, or it might break something if they've got something fragile in their pocket. A failure would mean that they just completely miss. They don't make it across and they just fall completely. They fall on the pavement. So not only are the way that we reuse the results not exactly the same, the way that rolls are made is not exactly the same. A lot of Powered by the Apocalypse games, you would only make a dice roll pretty rarely, and once per scene. A single dice roll might decide an entire fight or something like that. Eureka is not like that. Eureka has relatively frequent dice rolling compared to a Powered by the Apocalypse game. So expect to roll for a lot of different things your character does, rather than just having one roll decide a whole situation. So alternatively, we say that an investigator is trying to escape from a pursuer by car when they run out of gas in front of a gas station. If the pursuer is far behind, then they're far behind, but they'll catch up if the investigator does not keep moving. the investigator has to get out and try to push the car to the gas pump, and that's also going to be athletics. In that situation, a full success would mean that they're able to push the car to the gas pump really quickly and get it fueled back up and ready to go before the pursuer catches up. So they've accomplished their goal fully with no negative consequences. Partial success might mean that they still make it to the gas pump, but to a lower degree of success. Slower than otherwise. So, because they were slower, when the gas tank is about half full, they can see the headlights of their pursuer driving down the road. Now they've got to get going with only half a tank of gas instead of the full tank of gas. And a failure would mean that, they just can't push it. It won't budge, and they've got to figure something else out. And, before either roll is made, the game master and the players, especially the players, because it's their characters that might die, the narrator and players would have already been thinking about the possible outcomes of the roll, the 3 possible outcomes. In the case of jumping the gap, if they fail, they're obviously going to fall. So, as you can see, it always follows logically from the actions, situations, and environments. Partial successes and failures don't spontaneously generate characters or events of good or bad fortune, and full successes don't spontaneously produce, good fortune, or spontaneously produce a helpful guy who comes and helps or something like that. A partial success or failure would not cause a bunch of guards to come running in a stealth scenario. A partial success or failure to do something might make a noise, and if there were already guards established to be present, then the guards might hear that noise and come running, but the roll itself would not make guards randomly pop up and decide to come running. Now that all that is established, we can get to the investigation, how these mechanics are used when a character is investigating. So there's 2 major categories of roles in Eureka: investigative roles and non-investigative roles. An investigative role is any role that is done with the intention of directly uncovering some information related to the mystery. A non-investigative role is any other role that is not an investigative role. The examples I gave 30 seconds ago, using the athletic skill, those were both non-investigative roles. Not because they used the athletic skill, but because they were not about directly uncovering information. There is no one investigation skill in Eureka. Any skill, there's 22 main skills in Eureka, and any of them can be used for an investigative role. It usually just represents an investigator examining something and using their understanding from the relevant skill to draw conclusions from what they have examined. Investigative roles will never give false information, even on a failure. They will just give less information if it was a bad roll. Unless there's some really obvious consequences waiting to happen, a failure or partial success on most investigative roles will usually just mean less information. So as a player, you should be making your investigator do as many investigative roles as you can justify. And not just because they don't spontaneously generate problems, but they also give your investigator investigation points, which means they can get Eureka points. As your character makes investigative rolls, they build up investigation points. These kind of represent the character themselves thinking about the facts of the case, themselves, separate but alongside you, the player. This is another case where, like I mentioned in a previous video, failure is fun and failure is good in Eureka. Success is also good and fun, but in this case, a failure is worth 3 investigation points, a partial success is worth 2 investigation points, and a full success is worth 1 investigation point. So they get more investigation points for failing rolls than they do for succeeding rolls. But obviously, if they succeed rolls, they get all the information. They get a lot of information up front, so that's also good. When they build up enough investigation points, they get a Eureka point. Different investigators will take different amounts of investigation points to get a Eureka point. That's a character creation thing. I'll cover that in the character creation video. If there's any leftover investigation points after they get a Eureka point, those leftover investigation points get put towards the next Eureka point. Eureka points are extremely valuable because they can be spent on really powerful abilities. There's two main Eureka point abilities that every investigator has, and a bunch more Eureka point abilities that are only available to investigators with certain traits. I'll cover traits in the character creation video. The first Eureka point ability that everybody has is the Eureka moment. The character literally has a Eureka moment where they suddenly figure something out. This gives them and you a piece of information that they would have gotten if they had succeeded a previously failed or partial success investigative roll that they made. So if your character makes an investigative roll and fails or gets a partial success and doesn't get all the information, you write it down, and then Eureka points can be spent to uncover that information that they missed because of the failed roll. They also gain 1 point of composure from doing that, but I'll cover that in the composure video. It's a very important mechanic, but it's not part of this video. The other Eureka point ability that every investigator has is the focus ability. This allows you to add an extra d6 to a non-investigative roll for each Eureka point spent. So multiple Eureka points can be spent on a single focus. And you only keep the highest 2 dice. So if you add an extra d6 to a regular 2d6 roll and you get a 5, a 6, and a 4, you ignore the 4 and just keep the 5 and the 6 and add modifiers to the 5 and the 6. This makes it way more likely to succeed the roll, and exponentially so the more Eureka points get spent on the single roll. This is a more obviously like quote-unquote powerful ability, since it can like basically make sure a roll succeeds in a dangerous situation when it really needs to. But Eureka moments are just as important because they can help keep the party from getting stumped on the mystery, and that is very valuable, especially because a lot of Eureka mysteries will have an element of like a ticking clock, like a time. The party has to solve the mystery before a certain time or something bad is going to happen. So figuring things out fast and not getting stuck for too long is good. The last thing for the video is, now that I've talked about how the dice rolling mechanic works and how those dice rolling mechanics are applied in investigation, like investigation points and Eurekas, now for how it actually works in practice. We're going to do a few like real gameplay demonstration videos later, but for now I'm just going to talk about like the section of the rulebook where it explains how it works in practice. This is incredibly important. This is one of the most important parts of the rulebook. I recommend you read it in full. It is so important that I'm actually just going to read it in full to you right now in this video. Investigation of a location works as follows. The narrator describes the location in full, detailing as much of the surrounding environment that the investigators can see, hear, smell, etc. as possible, including, but not limited to, points of interest relevant to the investigation. These points of interest should not necessarily be highlighted and pointed out to the players listening. The players must pay attention and notice them on their own. The narrator should describe as many details as possible that set the scene beyond just listing points of interest, otherwise it will lead to a very boring investigation. For the sake of the players, we generally recommend either printed handouts or copy-pasting the room description to them, if you're on like an electronic platform, that they can easily just refer back to without having to ask or risk forgetting crucial details. If this is not possible for some reason, it may be helpful to assign one player the note taker to like fully transcribe what's being said about the room. Points of interest are basically anything that could be relevant to the investigation. A murder weapon on the ground, some footprints, a desk that might contain clues, some scratches on the wall, those could all be points of interest. Absolutely anything that the investigators could examine or learn information or draw conclusions from is a point of interest, even if it really turns out to be unrelated to the case. Points of interest aren't always physical items. A piece of information that a character learns can also be a point of interest, even if it is relayed to them during the course of a conversation. If someone tells an investigator the results of an autopsy, they could make a medicine check to check if there is anything unusual about the report, even if they weren't present. They're just being told about it, or it'd be based on what they're being told. Investigators do not need to make rolls just to see points of interest. If there's something in front of the investigators and it's not like completely obscured or like literally hidden, they just will see it automatically. Otherwise, if a point of interest, like there's no like Dungeons and Dragons perception check to see stuff. If a point of interest is somehow completely hidden, the player may have to like declare that their investigator like peeks behind the couch if it's behind the couch, or opens the locker, or checks beneath the desk, but this doesn't require any kind of like roll. If a clue is under the couch and they deliberately look under the couch, they will just see the clue. They may then choose to make an investigative roll on this clue that they see to gain more information about it, if there is any information to be gained. When the description of a surrounding area is done, the investigators are free to roam around looking for clues and examining points of interest. It is upon these points of interest that the investigators make their investigative rolls, using their skills to draw educated conclusions and deduce more information. Investigative rolls don't need to always provide new information. They can also rule out possibilities. Like a medicine roll could find out, like, no, this is definitely not a gunshot wound. That's still useful information. Either the narrator or the player may suggest a relevant skill to roll for a point of interest, but by default this responsibility falls on the player, though the narrator or the rest of the table may decide that the skill that the player suggested is inappropriate and call for a different one. Investigators do not walk into a room and start making like vague general rolls targeted at the entire room, just hoping to get pointed to clues. There has to be an objective for the roll. Any roll initiated by investigator action must have an objective. For example, like it's not enough to say the investigator wants to use medicine to examine the corpse. The player would need to state what the investigator is hoping to gain with that medicine check. Perhaps they are examining the body for wounds, or determining how long the body has been decomposing. The stated objective of a roll does not strictly define its outcome, however. Unexpected or unsought after information can still be gained from a roll, as long as it is relevant to the skill. If an investigator makes a full success to check the body for wounds, they would probably notice any other medical abnormalities in the course of their examination. As you get more familiar with Eureka and learn when to call for a roll, you might find that it makes sense in certain specific situations to deviate slightly from this procedure. It might make sense to use the same skill and the same point of interest, or the stated objective of a roll is vague because the investigator doesn't know exactly what they're looking for. Delving into the nuances of every single edge case and unusual situation could like fill a library. Use your best judgment on this. Just like follow these guidelines as closely as you can. Investigative rolls aren't always confined to any specific time frame. At the narrator's discretion, they may even occur retroactively, but if they're happening retroactively, this will be at a -3 penalty. For example, an investigator rifling through a dingy hotel room and didn't think of anything of like the stained sheets on the bed at the time, and then like later on when they've left the hotel room, they might wonder if those stains could have been blood. That would call for a medicine check retroactively at a -3 penalty. Multiple skills may be used to investigate the same point of interest, like within reason though. Players should not be allowed to like simply go down the entire list of skills for every point of interest for each investigator in order to like try and like basically farm investigation points. If an investigator is going to use an unexpected skill to investigate a clue, then like the player has to like justify their reasoning as to like why that skill would reveal any useful information. Different skills may reveal different information, or not. Sometimes different skills may all lead to the same information. Once an investigator has made a skill roll on a certain point of interest, the same investigator cannot use that particular skill on that particular point of interest again. However, a different investigator may use the same skill to investigate the same point of interest, at least until one of them ends up with a full success and then disseminates that information to the others. At that point, like further rolls on that same clue with the same skill would not grant any extra investigation points. Like, for example, if an investigator gets a full success on a nature roll to identify some animal tracks, and then they say, oh, these are bear tracks, I'm sure of it, then like the rest of the party will not get investigation points if other investigators try to make nature rolls on those tracks, like to identify the animal. It is very important for all investigations of locations to work this way, to like prevent all progress in an investigation from being gated behind a single roll. Additionally, like not every point of interest necessarily requires an investigative roll. In plenty of cases, the investigator will be able to draw useful conclusions from something without necessarily needing to roll. A successful skill roll could still be useful in that case. It may give a little additional information. It might confirm the conclusion they've already drawn, which is good, or maybe answer another question. A full success may only provide obvious information that was already known. A failure and not rolling both result in zero information. Like I said, like, you should be having your investigator make as many investigation rolls as you can justify. Like, but be reasonable, like within reason. Don't try to like cheat the system or make ridiculous justifications. Play the game within the spirit of the game, and it'll work. It'll be very fun, and your character will get lots of investigation points, which is good. And that is how to make rolls and how to use those rolls for investigation in Eureka Investigative Urban Fantasy. You can get a beta PDF copy of Eureka on our itch.io page. You can also get an even more updated beta version on our Patreon page for $5 subscription. We would really appreciate the support and the money. If you don't have any money to support us, you can still download it from itch.io. We'd appreciate it if you would share the video and like the video and tell your friends about the video and tell your friends about Eureka and play Eureka with your friends. Play our game. We really want that. Thank you for watching. Bye.